20 years to finish beginning Greek. Does that sound extreme? Well, today I'm going to interview a man who spent literally 20 years trying to work through beginning Greek. But that's not where the story finishes. Let's get into it. So over the last few months, I've been releasing the odd video here and there from Master New Testament Greek members about their story to learn beginning Greek and really start to grapple with the language. Now, the goal of this is really not to talk a lot about Master New Testament Greek. It's really to encourage you to consider learning Greek. That's really what I'm trying to do here. And the story that I have today with one of our members called Neil is really focused around his story of 20 years to learn beginning Greek. 20 years, that's an amazing amount of time to spend diligently trying to finish beginning Greek. And perhaps some of you may resonate with this because beginning Greek is difficult. And I recognize this, and I think, people like Neil can certainly identify with that. And there are Facebook groups. In fact, Neil is a leader, a moderator of a Facebook group talking about Greek as well. I'll leave a link in the description below to that group if you're interested in checking it out. If you really want to get through beginning Greek, one of the things that Neil says in this is really important. So let's start by talking to Neil about how he got interested in beginning Greek and learning Greek, and then we'll dig into that story a little bit more.
Well, I've always had an interest in languages. And I enjoyed French and German at school. They were things that we studied. But it was in the late 80s, I would say, when one of the guys that preached in our church, it was near Christmas time, and he was reading the text out and then talking about it. And I asked him afterwards, I said, well, which version are you using? And he said, well, that's my own translation. And I thought, oh, wow. Didn't know people could do their own translations. How'd you do that then, sort of thing? And I think he'd been a trained Baptist minister back in the day. And he was obviously interested in it. And we began talking about things a bit. I think I then bought John Dobson's book, who's a British guy, and started learning that and doing it myself, basically, and thoroughly interested in it. But there's a story with that. I went through 3 editions of it. As one wore out, I then bought the next edition when it came out, and it took me 20 years to get through to the end of James Dobson's book. It was like the proverbial snail that climbs up the well 3 feet and then slides back 2 feet again when it stops.
So 20 years to learn beginning Greek. 20 years to get through Dobson's beginning Greek grammar. That's a long time. And I want to encourage you that you don't have to take that long. And so we want to know, what was it that made it's such a long process for him? Why did it take him 20 years? Well, let's find out.
I think it's sort of start up again with enthusiasm, and then you get so far. A lot of his examples were made up stuff, but it was very exciting when you got to the chunks of text where you're actually reading stuff from the New Testament itself. So that was great. But I think if there'd have been more of the actual New Testament text, that would have spurred me on that bit further. But also you get to a point where you're a bit overloaded and you stop for a bit and then other things take over, and then by the time you've come back round to it, you've forgotten stuff. You have to start again. And I was doing it on my own, of course. I mean, although I'd got there was this guy that had started off the interest. I didn't have anybody that was actually talking it through with me, mentoring it through with me. There was nobody else that I could chat through about it. It was before days of the internet where you could find groups and things like that easily. But when I finished it, I thought, oh, right, okay, I'll move on to the next, something else now, and bought Wallace's book. I started looking at that and I thought, hang on a minute, there's a lot of gaps here. Because Dobson's book, although great, was very inductive, and you learned what you needed to learn for his way of teaching. And it also included things like the aoristis punctilia and stuff like that. It was all to pot on aspect from what we know these days. So I thought, well, I'll get Mounts, because I realised that, they were linked. So I worked my way through Mounts again on my own, got to the end. But apart from studying the Greek text as for what was necessary to do the exercises, I just didn't have that impetus to go further into the actual New Testament itself.
If you're finding this story really helpful or encouraging or inspiring, I would love it if you could just hit the like button. That will tell the person I'm interviewing that you really enjoy what they're telling us, and it also helps the YouTube algorithm so that other people find this story and also get the same encouragement that you're getting. Don't forget also to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you haven't done so already. Let's get back into it. One of the questions that comes to my mind as I listen to Neil as he's talking about and sharing his story is really, what were his expectations around beginning Greek? I mean, and learning Greek. Why would he be willing to stick at it for 20 years? What was he hoping to achieve? And did he achieve those expectations or not? Or were those just something that was not that clear? Which is one of the things that I've tried to be, encourage you with, is to try and be clear with your expectations about where you're going. Because one of the things is, if you don't have a clear outcome you're aiming for, you never know when you hit it, right? And I think this is one of the things that, to some extent, plagued Neil as well. Now, I'm not saying that's the only thing. I think there's other things at work here, as you've already heard, but certainly having clear goals, I think, is really important for learning biblical Greek. And the goal that I want you to adopt is not merely to know some of the language, but to actually be able to read the New Testament in the original language for the sake of your soul, for the sake of clarity, for the sake of the confidence that comes from that clarity, and for the sake of effectiveness in actually working with God to serve the people around you. So that's really what I encourage you to do. So now that we've sort of got an idea of why it took 20 years, what has been the biggest challenge in sort of coming to grips with and being able to really read the text of the New Testament? What was it that's made the difference for Neil?
I think the vocabulary is the most challenging thing. Having enough of it to get going. I mean, you can look things up, you can have your reader, but your reader doesn't always work because you think you've got the idea of what the word means, but you come to another page and it means something different. But if you've got those ideas of what the glosses are in your head, you can make a reasonable judgment yourself from the context of what you're reading, rather than relying on what's at the bottom of the page. And I think that was part of what was keeping me back. I think the other part of things was a lot of the grammar that you find to the end of the course, such as the use of infinitives, that being at the end of a normal beginning course, you suddenly find when you start reading, actually, this is really common and it comes up all the while. So you really need to have those ideas behind you as to what that type of grammar is all about to make sense of what you're reading. Having that end of the course, I think some of us have said in the past, if only perhaps what most basic grammars put at the end, if that was brought forward a bit, it might make life a bit easier for people in general.
So what you're finding then is that, you've got the vocabulary, which is difficult. So learning the vocabulary is really helpful, but also you've got some of those things that at the end of the grammar, because it's at the end, it makes you feel like it's kind of not really that important. But then you get into the text and you find, actually, this is really important and I do need to know this really well.
And there's that sense of trying to rush, you're coming to the end of a book, you rush through it a bit. And because you want to move on. It's not the learning of the vocabulary that's hard. It's the way to go about doing it. So we've seen Neil's story a little bit. If you want to avoid being somebody like Neil, who takes 20 years to get through beginning Greek, what do you think is necessary to get through that? What do you think is going to be the one thing that's going to make a difference? Well, why don't we ask Neil? Because he's found one thing that has made such a big difference to him. So let's ask that question and then we'll come back and we'll wrap up. Possible to make headway on your own, but it's an awful lot easier to make headway if you've got a like-minded group to do it with.
That's really valuable. I think I think that's great, because there are so many times you hear of people going it alone and you ask them how they're going, how long they've been doing it, and how they're going. And, I've been doing this for about a year now. Have you finished beginning Greek? No, I'm about, 5 chapters in. Well, you need some, that's the sort of person you're thinking about, right? You can, like 20 years getting through Dobson, that kind of scenario is like exactly like what you've been through. So if you've been wanting to learn Greek for years, and maybe you've been like Neil, working through a beginning Greek, but never really finished, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it just seems like a really long period of time that you're working through this, then I want to encourage you to consider downloading my Roadmap to Mastery at masterntgreek.com/roadmap and perhaps joining the waitlist to join the Mastery membership. The reason is that this is the exact process that Neil has used, and he jumped around in beginning Greek when he joined us. He joined several cohorts all at once and was able just to use that to very quickly increase his knowledge of those basics very quickly. But also, I want to encourage you to get a group of people around you. Now, it may not be with Master New Testament Greek, and that's fine. The goal here is not necessarily to sign you up for Master New Testament Greek. The goal here is to get you reading the Greek of the New Testament, really digging into the New Testament so that you're able to get the most out of it. And again, the main reason for doing this is, first of all, clarity, right? You want clarity in the text. You want to know what the text is saying. You want the confidence to understand what the text is saying and to be able to say, actually, here's what the text is saying, and therefore, here's the conclusions from that. You want the effectiveness and efficiency that comes from being able to work directly in the languages. So you're not working through translations and then going backwards and forwards with all the tools all the time. And then finally, you want to do this for the sake of your soul. It's really about growing in Christ's likeness, becoming closer to Christ, and then living in accordance with His will. So I want to encourage you to consider learning Greek, and don't let the difficulty of beginning Greek stop you from making the progress you want to make so that you're able to get the benefits of learning the language. So that's it for this week. Stay tuned for another one of these in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to serving you again in the future. See you then.